Sham Sharadava Nalalida Loka Tranaya Karuna Gana Ganatum Sham Sharadava Nalalida Loka Tranaya Karunya Ganaganatum Prapta Sakalyana Gunanavasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravrindam Prapta Sakalyana Gunanavasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravrindam 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 Mahaprabhu Kirtana Nitya Gita Vaditra Madhyam Manasurasena Mahaprabhu Kirtana Nitya Gita Vaditra Madhyam Manasurasena Romanchakam Pasru Taranga Bhajo Vande Guru Shri Charanaravrindam Shri Vigrahara Dana Nityanana Shringaratanama Niramajanado Dana Nityanana Shringaratanama Jokta Sabaktam Sa Neyonjatapi Vande Guru Shri Charanaravrindam Chaturvidha Shri Bhagavat Prasada Svatana Traptam Hari Bhakta Sangam Chaturvidha Kridvaiva trupti vajato shadeva Vande Guru Shri Charanaravrindam Kridvaiva trupti vajato shadeva Shiradikamo Davayara Param Madhurya Leela Gunarupa Namnam Shiradika Madhurya Leela Gunarupa Namnam Pratikshana Swa Danalalupasa Vande Guru Shri Charanaravrindam Vande Guru Shri Ne kunjayuno Ratikeli siddhai Yayali veri joktir Apekshaneya Ne kunjayuno Tatra Tidaksha Ativalavasya Vande Guru Shri Charanaravrindam Sakshadharitena Shamasta Shastre Ruktastatthava Vyataiva Sadhuvi Sakshadharitena Shamasta Shastre Kintu Pravarja Priyaiva Tasya Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Kintu Pravarja Priyaiva Tasya Vande Guru Shri Yasya Prasadad Bhagavat Prasadam Yasya prasadam nagati kutapi Yasya prasadam nagati kutapi Dhyayam stubam tasya yasya trisandhyam Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Vande Guru Shri Charanara Vrindam Charanara Vrindam Vande Guru Shri Charanara Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Nama Vishnu Padaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Namaste Sarasvate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pachatarisha Tarine Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pachatarisha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Nityananda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, oh, Hare Krishna, oh, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, oh, Hare Rama, oh, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram. Hare Hare Nama, Krishna Jadavaya Nama, Hare Jadavaya Madhavaya Keshavaya Nama, Jadavaya Madhavaya Keshavaya, Gopal Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan, Gopal Govinda Ram Shri Madhusudan, Giridhari Gopinath Madana Mohan, Giridhari Gopinath Madana Mohan, Shri Chaitanya Nityananda Shri Advaita Sita, Hari Guru Vaishnava Bhagavata Gita, Hari Guru Vaishnava Bhagavata, Shri Rupa Sanatan Vatara Guna, Shri Rupa Sanatan, Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasaraguna, Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Shri Radha Nila Madhava, Radha Nila Madhava Radhe. Jaya Jagannath, Jaya Baladeva, Jaya Subhadrama, Jaya Sudarshan Chakra. Sitaram Jayo Sitaram, Sitaram Jayo Lakshman Hanuman. Jayo Lakshmi Narasimha Jayo Lakshmi Narasimha Lakshmi Narasimha Jayo Prahlad Maharaj. Nitai Gaura Haribo 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo 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 Nitai Gaura Pramanande Haribo. Jai Vishnu Paraparamita Prabhupada Kacharya Sutra Sarasi Shimari Divine Grace Abhacharvin Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada की जय. ISKCON प्रतिष्ठा विधि संस्थापकाचार्य वैष्णव शिरोमणि पतित पावन श्रील प्रभुपाद जी महाराज की जय. श्री गौरी गुरु वर्गा पतित उद्धार की जय. श्री रूप सनातन भक्त रघुनाथ श्री जीव गोपाल भक्त दास गुण सतगोस्वामी प्रभु की जय. नामाचार्य श्रील हरिदास ठाकुर जी की जय. अनंत कुरु वैष्णव वृंद की जय. प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवसरि गौर भक्त वृंद की जय. जय परम दयाल श्री नित्यानंद प्रभु की जय. जय प्रेम नाम संकीर्तन एक जनाक प्रेम पुरुषोत्तम श्री सच्चिनंदन श्रीमन गौरंग चैतन्य महाप्रभु गौर हरि मवरण अवतार की जय. गोलोकेर प्रमधान नम संकीर्तन जय की जय. जुग धर्म हरे कृष्ण महामंत्र की जय. बृहत् निदांग ट्रांसलेंटल बुक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन सेवा की जय. श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ राधा कुंज श्याम कुंज गिरिराज गोवर्धन की जय. श्री ब्रज भूमि वृंदावन मथुरा धाम की जय. देलोशिव श्री राधा नीलमाधव की जय. परम करुण श्री गौर निताय की जय. श्री मायापुर नवद्वीप चक्र धाम की जय. श्री पुरुषोत्तम क्षेत्र जगन्नाथ धाम की जय. श्री जगन्नाथ स्वामी बलदेव प्रभु सुभद्रादेवी सुदर्शन चक्र भगवान की जय. भक्ति सर्व विघ्न विनाशन कृष्ण हरे भगवान की जय. गंगा माय जमुना माय की जय. तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी भक्ति देवी की जय. श्रीमती वरदारणी की जय. समवेत भक्त वृंद की जय. निताय गौर हरि परमानंदे. All glories to the assembly bodies. All glories to the assembly bodies. All glories to the assembly bodies. All glories, all glories, all glories to Shri Shri Guru Shri Guru.
Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste Narasimhaya. Praladadayine Praladadayine Hiranyakashe Purvakshaha Shilatankanakalaye To Narsingha Parato Narsingha Yato Yato Yami Tato Narsingha Mahir Narsingha Hridaye Narsingha Narasimhamadem sharanam prapade Tava karakamalabare nakamadutta shringam Dalita hiranyakashipu Tanubringam Keshavadrita Narahare Rupa Jai Jagadish Hare Jai Jagadish Hare Jai Jagadish Hare केशवधृता नरहरे रूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जयो नरसिंहदेव जयो नरसिंहदेव जयो नरसिंहदेव जयो नरसिंहदेव जयो प्रहलाद महाराज जयो प्रहलाद महाराज प्रहलाद महाराज जयो प्रहलाद महाराज जयो जयो प्रभुपाद 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 जयो जयो प्रभुपाद जयो जयो गुरुदेव 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 जयो जयो गुरुदेव निथाय गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निथाय गौर हरि बोल
श्री भक्ति पर सर्वनाश सिंह भगवान की जाए भक्त श्रेष्ठ प्रहलाद महाराज की जाए पूरी प्रेमानंदे श्री वृंदाई तुलसी देवाई प्रिय के सब सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्राणी देवी सतवताय वृंदाई तुलसी देवाई प्रिय के सब सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्राणी देवी सतवताय वृंदाई तुलसी देवाई प्रिय के सब सत्य विष्णु भक्ति प्राणी देवी सतवताय श्रीमती तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी की जय।
कृष्ण सेवा पाबो ए अभिलाषी
श्री राधा कृष्ण सेवा पावो हे अभिलाषी
जितो मारा शरण लो तारा वंच पूरन हो
जितो मारा शरण लो तारा वंच पूरन
कृपा कोरी कोरो तारे वृंदावन वासी
तुम्हें कृपा करे करतारे वृंदावन वासी
मोराए अभिलाष विलास कुंज दियो वास
मोराए अबेला विलास कुंज दियावा
नयने हरि बो सदा जुगल रूपरासी
अमिनायने विवसवा जुगल रूपरासी
ए निवेदन धारो साखीर अनुगाता कोरो
Sakirayano Tatakaro
सेवा अधिकारा दिए कोरो निज दासी
Sevayare Karadiye Karane Jarasi
दीना कृष्ण दासे कोई जिना मोरा होए
Krishna Das Kae Namara
श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदा जिना भासी
Radha Govinda Prema Sadai Navasi
श्री राधा गोविंद प्रेमे सदा जिना भासी
Shri Radha Govinda Prema Sadai Navasi
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्मा हत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणाशन्ति प्रदक्षिण पदे पदे
Dani Kani Sapapani Brahma Hatyari Kani Sa Tani Tani Prana Santi Dadati Navani Pade
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्मा हत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणाशन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
Tani Kani Sapapani Brahma Hatyari Kani Sa Tani Tani Prana Santi Pradakshina Pade Pade
यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्मा हत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणाशन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
Kani Kani Sapapani Brahma Hatyari Kani Sa Tani Tani Prana Santi Pradakshina Pade Pade
हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे
Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani.
Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani.
Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi.
Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi.
Nityai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nityai Gaura Hari Bol.
Nitai Gaura
Hari
Hari
Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nityai Gaura Hari Bol. Srimati Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki jai.
Jai. Shri Vrindai Tulsi Devai Priyai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Pari Devi Satavatai. Vrindai Tulsi Devai Priyai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Pari Devi Satavatai. Vrindai Tulasi Devai Priyai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Pari Devi Satavatai. Shrimati Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki jai. O Tulasi, beloved Krishna, I bow before you again and again. My desire to attend the service of Shri Shri Radha and Krishna. We will take shelter of you as wishes fulfilled. Bestow your mercy upon him, you make him president of Vrindavan. My desire is that you also give me a residence in pleasure groves of Shri Vrindavan Dham. Thus within my vision, I will always behold the beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me a Prabhupada with damsels of Raj. Please give me the privilege of devotional service and make me your own met servant. This very fallen and lowly servant Krishna praise. May I always sing the love of Shri Radha and Govind. Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki jai. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Krishna Kum ki jai. Chaito Darpanam Arjuna. Sarvatmasnam param param jayati Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Nam Akari Vaudha Ija Sarva Shakti Tatrapita Niyamita Shmarane Nakala Sita Dushita Bhakti Paya Bhukuvan Mamaki Naiva Midishanya Janyanvada Vinaradi Srichena Karo Saishna Amanna Manadina Kirtanya Sadari Nadhanam Najananya Sundari Sundam Bhadari Sakamani Mama Janmani Janmanishwari Kodava distinguishes the prior condition of life with repeated birth and death. This Sankirtan moment is a primary indication for humanity at large, because its praise raised the benediction mode. Physical life of all transcendental mode. It increases devotion of transcendental bliss and enables us to fully test the nectar for which we always uncheat. O my Lord, the holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings, and thus you have hundreds, millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names, you have invested your transcendental energies. There is not even hard and fast rule for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness, you enable us to easily approach you by your holy names. But I'm so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. Once we chant the holy name of the Lord in humble state of mind, think of oneself the Lord on Sruni Street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. Only one Jokasa devotional service, birth after birth. O Son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor. Yet somehow or other I'm falling in this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at the Lotus feet. O my Lord, when will my eyes will be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? Will my voice choke up, and will the hairs of my body stand on end there is touched with your name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I feel all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and you should remain so. Even if sunders me roughly by his embrace, or makes you broken-hearted by not being present before me, he is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord unconditionally. Shikastakam ki jai. So we have confirmed systematic chanting the holy name of the Lord that must be avoided. They are as follows. 1. Blaspheme, the word is dedicate the life for propagating the holy name of the Lord. 2. To consider the name of the gods, that are Shiva and Brahma, to be equal to independent of the Lord Vishnu. 3. To disobey the orders of the spiritual master. 4. Blaspheme the Vedic literature or literature of the Son of Vedic. 5. Consider the glory of chanting Hare Krishna in the imagination. 6. To give some interpretation of the holy name of the Lord. 7. To commit simple activities on the strength of chanting the holy name of the Lord. 8. To consider the chanting of Hare Krishna as one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which are often treated as spiritual activities of karma. 9. To instruct the faithful expression of the glory of the holy name. And 10. To not have complete faith in chanting the holy name.
And to maintain material attachments, even after understanding so many instructions in this matter. It's also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be a Vaishnava must carefully guard against the 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve the desired success. Krishna Prema. Now let us offer our most humble obeisances unto all Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. They are just like desired trees that can fulfill the desires of everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Vanchakalpa tarabhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha pattana pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha vaishnava thakur ki jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutali Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Tinamani Namaste Saraswati Deve Guruvani Pacharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Desatarine Srimad Bhagavatam Grantaraja Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Janmad Yasya Yato Naviyad Yataratas Chartisa Vigyaswarat Tene Brahma Hridaya Adikavaye Muhyanti Yatsurayaha Tejo Vari Madan Yata Vinimayo Yatrati Sargo Misha Damnastrena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi. O my Lord, Shri Krishna, Son of Vasudeva, O all-pervading personality Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute truth. and the primeval cause of all
and
causes,
the primeval cause of all
of the
causes,
creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested universes.
of the creation, sustenance, and destruction manifested.
He is directly and indirectly conscious of all
He's
manifestations.
directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations.
And he's independent because there's no other cause beyond him.
And he is independent because there is no other cause beyond
It
him.
is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji,
It is only first imparted with knowledge into
the original living
the
being.
original living being.
By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion.
By him, even the great sage and the demigods are pleasant.
As one is bewildered by the illusory representation
By the visual representation
of water seen on fire or land seen on
from
water.
words in the fire of dance,
Only because of him do the material universes,
because of the material universe
temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature,
temporarily manifested the most
appear factual although they are unreal.
appear actual of
I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Sri Krishna,
I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Shri
who is eternally existent in transcendental abode,
which is eternally existent,
which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world.
which is very well free from the illusory representation of material.
I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth.
I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute.
Dharma projita kaitravatra,
Dharma puji dakaita
paramo nimatsaranam satam,
paramo nimasanam
vedyam vastavam atra vastu,
vedipam samas
shivadam tapa trayon mulanam.
shivadam tapu jamanam
Shrimad Bhagavate Mahamani Krite,
Shrimad Bhagavate Mahamani
Kim Va Purer Ishvaraha,
Kimba Parishwara
Sadyo Hridi Avarudyate Tra,
Sadhya Rudya Varijati
Kriti Bihi Sususubhistakshana.
He Shushushvistatya
Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated.
completely rejecting all religious activities which are material.
This Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth,
This Bhagavata Purana proclaims a high
which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart.
which is understandable by those who are just pure in the heart.
The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all.
As truth is reality distinguished from religion for the welfare of all.
Such truth uproots the threefold miseries.
This truth uproots the three forms.
This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity,
This beautiful Bhagavatam compiled with great sage Vyasadeva in
is
maturity.
sufficient in itself for God realization.
It's sufficient itself for God.
What is the need of any other scripture?
What is the need of the other
As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam,
attentively hears the message of
by
Bhagavatam,
this culture of knowledge,
by this
the
culture,
Supreme Lord is established within his heart.
Supreme Lord is established within his heart.
Nigama kalpaturu galitam phalam,
Nigama kalpataro galitam
sukhamukad amrita dravya samyutam,
Shukamukad Amrita Dravya
pibata Bhagavatam rasam alayam,
Shivatava Rasam Rasam
uhur aho raska bhuvibavukaha.
Muhuraho Rasutav.
O expert and thoughtful men, relish Srimad Bhagavatam,
O expert and thoughtful man, relish Bhagavatam.
the mature fruit of the desire to Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become more tasteful.
Therefore, this food has become more tasteful.
Although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all,
The nectarian is so relishable,
including liberated souls.
including
Shinvatam Swakata Krishna, Punya Shravana Kirtan,
Punya Shravana Kirtan,
Hridyam Taksto Hi Bhadrani, Vidurnoti To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures, or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita, is itself righteous activity. And for one who hears about Krishna, Lord Krishna is dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as a best wishing friend, and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him. Nasta presu bhadresu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati tamasloke bhaktir bhagavati naistaki. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and from the devotees, he becomes fixed in the devotional service to the Lord.
He becomes fixed in devotional service to the Lord.
Tadarajastamo bhava kamalobhadayaschaye chetaitaravidam sitvam sattve prasidati. By development of devotional service, one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance, and thus material lust and avarice are diminished. Evam prasana manaso bhagavad bhakti yogataha bhagavad tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate. When these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and understands the science of God perfectly. Vidyate Hridaya Grantis Chidyante Sarvasamsaya Siyante Chashikarmani Drista Evatmanishwari. Thus, Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection and enables one to come at once to the stage of a samsayam samagram, understanding the Supreme Absolute Truth, Personality, Godhead. Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness can one understand the science of Krishna. Shri Guru Vastika prayers ki jai. The spiritual master is receiving benediction from the ocean of mercy, just as a cloud pours water on a forest fire to extinguish it. So the spiritual master delivers the materially afflicted world by extinguishing the blazing fire of material existence.
So the spiritual master delivers the materially afflicted world by extinguishing the fire.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet. Such a spiritual master is an ocean of auspicious qualities.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet. Such a spiritual master is an ocean of good qualities.
Chanting the holy name, dancing in ecstasy, singing and playing musical instruments.
Chanting the holy name, dancing in ecstasy, singing and playing musical instruments.
The spiritual master is always gladdened by the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
The spiritual master is always gladdened by the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Because he is relishing the mellows of pure devotion within his mind.
Because he's relishing the mellows of pure devotion within his mind.
Sometimes his hair stands on end.
Sometimes his hair stands on
He
end.
feels quivering in his body.
He feels quivering in
And
his body.
tears flow from his eyes like waves.
And tears flow from his eyes like waves.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master.
I offer my respectful obeisance to Lord of Feet to such a spiritual
The
master.
spiritual master is always engaged in the temple worship of Shri Radha and Krishna.
The spiritual master is always engaged in temple worship of Shri Radha.
He also engages his disciples in such worship.
He also engages his disciples in such worship.
They dress the deities in beautiful clothes and ornaments,
They use their deeds and beautiful clothes and ornaments,
clean their temple,
cleanse their
and perform other similar worship of the
and
Lord.
perform other similar worship.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master.
I offer my obeisance to the Lord of Feet to such a spiritual
The
master.
spiritual master is always offering Krishna 4 kinds of delicious food.
The spiritual master is always offering Krishna 4 kinds of
Analyzes that which is licked, chewed, drunk, and sucked.
Analyze that which is lectured, drunk, and
When the
such.
spiritual master sees that the devotees are satisfied by eating Bhagavad Prasada,
When the spiritual master sees that God is satisfied by hearing dear Bhagavad Prasad,
he is satisfied.
he is satisfied.
I offer my respectful obeisance unto lotus feet of such a spiritual master.
I offer my respectful obeisance to the Lord of Feet to such a spiritual master.
The spiritual master is always eager to hear and chant about the unlimited conjugal pastimes of Radhika and Madhava,
The master is
and their qualities, names, and forms.
and the quality
The spiritual master aspires to relish these at every moment.
spiritual master aspires to relish these every
I
moment.
offer my respectful obeisance unto lotus feet of such a spiritual master.
I offer my respectful obeisance to the Lord of Feet to such a spiritual
The
master.
spiritual master is very dear because he's expert in assisting the gopis who at different times make different tasteful arrangements for the perfection of Radha and Krishna's conjugal loving affairs within the groves of Vrindavan.
The spiritual master is very dear because he's expert in assisting the gopis when different time make different tasteful arrangement for the perfection of Radha and Krishna conjugal face within the groves of Vrindavan.
I offer my most humble obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual
I
master.
offer my respectful obeisance unto the Lord of Feet to such a spiritual master.
The spiritual master is to be honored as much as the Supreme Lord because he's the most confidential servitor of the
Spiritual
Lord.
master is to be honored as much as Supreme Lord because he's the most confidential servant of the Lord.
This is acknowledged in all revealed scriptures and followed by all authorities.
Acknowledging all revealed scriptures and followed by.
Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master who is a bona fide representative of Shri Hare Krishna.
Before from my respectful obeisance to the Lord of the Supreme Master, who is a bona fide representative of Shri Hare Krishna.
By the mercy of the spiritual master, one receives the benediction of Krishna.
By the mercy of the spiritual master, one receives the benediction of Krishna.
Without the grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advancement.
Without the grace of the spiritual master,
Therefore, I should always remember and praise the spiritual master.
so always remember and praise the Master.
At least 3 times a day, I should offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master. Shri Brahma Samhita Ki Jai. Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha Anadiradi Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam.
Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha Anadiradi Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam.
Chintamani Prakara Satma Sukalpa Vriksha Lakshavrite Susravira Vipaliyantam Lakshmi Sahasra Satasambhrama Sevyamanam Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Venam Kvananta Aravinda Dalayataksam Varhavatam Samasitam Buddha Sundarangam Kandarpa Koti Kamaniya Visesha Sobham Govindamadi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Alola Chandra Kala Sadvanamalya Vansi Ratnam Gadam Pranayakeli Kalavilasam Shyamam Chibanga Lavitani Taprakasam Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Angani Yasya Sakalendriya Vrittimanti Pasyanti Panti Kalyanti Chiram Jaganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadujvala Vigrahasya Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Advaitam Achyutam Anadim Anantarupam Adyam Purana Purusham Navayovanam Sha Vede Sudurlabam Adurlabam Atma Bhakto Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Advaitam Achyutam Anadim Anantarupam Adyam Purana Purusham Navayovanam Cha Vede Sudurlabam Adurlabam Atma Bhakto Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Pantastukoti Satavatsara Sampragamyo Vayoratapi Manaso Munipungamanam Sopyastiyat Prapadasimya Vichintya Tatve Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ekopya Sora Chayitam Jagadanda Koti Kotim Yas Chaktirasti Jagadanda Chayayadanta Andantarasta Paramanu Chayantarastam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yad Bhava Bhavita Diyo Manajastutaiva Samprapya Rupa Mahima Sanayana Bhusaha Suktaryameva Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasa Pratibhavitabhis Tabirya Eva Nijarupataya Kalabi Goloka Eva Nivasata Kilatma Bhuto Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena Santak Sadaiva Hridesa Vilokayanti Yam Shama Sundaram Achintya Gunaswarupam Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Ramadi Murti Sukalani Amenatistan Nanavataram Akarod Bhuvane Sukintu Krishna Swayam Samabhavat Paramam Pumam Yo Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yasya Prabha Prabhavato Jagadanda Koti Kotisvasesu vasudadi vibhuti binam. Tad Brahma Niskalam Anantam Ashesha Bhutam. Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Maya Yasya Jagadanda Sthani Sute. Tragun Yatad Vishaya Veda Vitayamana. Sattva Pralambi Parasattva Visuddha Sattvam. Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Ananda Chinmaya Rasat Mataya Manasu. Ya Praninam Pratifalam Smaratam Upetya. Vilayatena Bhuvnani Jayaya Jasram. Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Golokanamni Nichatamni Talechatasya. Devi Mahesha Haridama Sute Sutesu. Tete Prabhava Nichaya. Tete Prabhava Nichaya Vihitascha. Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Shiste Strati Pralaya Sadhana Saktireka. Chayeva Yasya Bhuvanani Vibharti Durga. Iti Chanda Rupam Apiyasya Chachestatesa. Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Shiram Yata Dadi Vikara Visesa Yoga. Sanjayate Nahitata Pritakasti Heto. Yasambutam Apitata Samapaiti Karya. Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Deeparch Eva Hitasantanam Abhyupetya. Deepayate Vivita Heta Samana Dharma. Yastadrikeva Hicha Vishnutaya Vibhati. Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Yakarna Narnava Jale Vajatisma Yoga. Nidram Ananta Jagadanda Saroma Kupaha. Adhara Shakti Avalamya Param Swamurtim. Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Yasyaika Niswasitakala Matavalamya. Jivanti Loma Vilaja Jagadandanataha. Vishnu Mahan Sahiha Yasya Kala Vishesho. Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Vasvam Yatasma Sakalesu Nideshu Teja Ha. Teja Ha Swiyam Kiyat Pakatayat Apitad Vatatra. Brahmaya Esa Jagadanda Vidana Karta. Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Yat Pada Palavam Yugam Vinidaya Kumbha. Twande Pranama Samaye Samaye Sarkanadi Rajaha. Samaye Vignam Vihantam Alamasya Jagatrayasya. Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Agnir Mahi Gaganamambu Maruddhisascha. Kalastatatma Manasiddhi Jagatrayani. Yasmad Bhavanti Vibhavanti Vishanti Yamcha. Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Yaschak Suresha Savita Sakala Grahanam. Raja Samasta Sura Raja Samasta Suramurtira Sesa Tejaha Yasya Gaya Brahmati Samrita Kala Chakro Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Dharmo Tapapa Nichaya Shrutayastapamsi Brahmadi Kita Patakava Dayaschayena Jivaha Jivaha Yadata Matra Vibhava Prakata Prabhava Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yastrindra Gopa Matavendra Mahoswakarma Bandhana Rupa Falabhajana Matanoti Karmani Nirdahati Kintu Chabakti Bhajam Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Yam Krodha Kama Sahaja Pranayadi Bitti Vatsalya Moha Guru Gaura Vasevya Bhavahai Sanchintya Tasya Sadrisim Tanamapurete Govinda Madi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami Shiyakanta Kanta Parama Purusha Kalpataravo Druma Bhumishchintamani Ganamayi Tuyam Amritam Shid Anandam Jyoti Param Apitat Asvadyam Apicha Sayatra Shiradi Bihi Shravati Surabhi Vyascha Sumahan Nirmesh Saradakyo Va Rajati Nahiyatra Pisamaya Bhaje Sveta Dvipam Tamaham Iha Golakam Itiyam Vidantaste Santakshiti Viralachara Katipaye Shrimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 6, Text 21. Shruti Vichakrame Vishwam Sa Nasane Ube Yada Vidyacha Vidyacha Purushas Tu Bhai Ashrayaha. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. By his energies, the all-pervading personality of Godhead is thus comprehensively the master in the activities of controlling and in devotional service. He is the ultimate master of both nescience and factual knowledge of all situations. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The word Vishwan, is significant in this verse. One who travels perfectly in every field of activity is called a Purusha or Kshetragya. Though these two terms, Kshetragya and Purusha, are equally applicable to both the individual self and the Supreme Self, the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita 13.3, the matter is explained as follows. Kshetragyam chapimam vidi sarva kshetreshu bharata. Chetra chetra gayor jnanam yattaj jnanam matam mama. It's Bhagavad Gita 13.3. Chetra means the place, and one who knows the place is called a Kshetragya. The individual self knows about his limited field of activities, but the Supreme Self, the Lord, knows about the unlimited field of activities. The individual soul knows about his own thinking, feeling, willing activities, but the Super Soul, or the Paramatma, the Supreme Controller, being present everywhere, knows everyone's thinking, feeling, and willing activities. And as such, the individual living entity is the minute master of his personal affairs, whereas the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the master of everyone's affairs, past, present, and future. Vedaham samititani, etc. Only the ignorant person does not know this difference between the Lord and the living entities. The living entities are distinguished from incognizant matter. The living entities, as distinguished from incognizant matter, may be qualitatively equal to the Lord in cognizance, but the living entity can never be equal to the Lord in full knowledge of past, present, and future. And because the living entity is partially cognizant, he is therefore sometimes forgetful of his own identity. This forgetfulness is specifically manifested in the field of the ikapad vibhuti of the Lord, or in the material world, but in the tripad vibhuti field of actions, or in the spiritual world, there is no forgetfulness by the living entities, who are free from all kinds of contaminations resulting from the forgetful state of existence. The material body is the symbol of the gross and subtle form of forgetfulness. Therefore, the whole atmosphere of the material world is called avidya or nescience, whereas the whole atmosphere of the spiritual world is called vidya, or full of knowledge. There are different stages of avidya, and they are called dharma, artha, and moksha. The idea of moksha, or liberation, held by the monist in the matter of oneness of the living entity and the Lord by ultimate merging in one, is also the last stage of materialism or forgetfulness. Knowledge of the qualitative oneness of the self and the superself is partial knowledge, and ignorance also, because there is no knowledge of quantitative difference, as explained above. The individual self can never be equal to the Lord in cognizance, otherwise he could not be placed in a state of forgetfulness. So because there is a stage of forgetfulness of the individual selves or the living entities, there is always a gulf of difference between the Lord and the living entities, as between the part and the whole. The part is never equal to the whole, so the conception of 100% equality of the living being with the Lord is also nescience. In the field of nescience, activities are directed toward lording. In the field of nescience, activities are directed toward lording it over the creation. In the material world, therefore, everyone is engaged in acquiring material opulence to lord it over the material world. Therefore, there is always clash and frustration, which are the symptoms of nescience. But in the field of knowledge, there is devotional service to the Lord, bhakti. Therefore, there is no chance of being contaminated by the influence of nescience or forgetfulness of vidya in the liberated stage of devotional activities. The Lord is thus the proprietor of the fields both of nescience and cognition, and it remains the choice of the living entity to exist in either of the above regions. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. By his energies, the all-pervading personality of Godhead is thus comprehensively the master in the activities of controlling, and in devotional service, he is the ultimate master of both nescience and factual knowledge of all situations. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So again, now we're hearing more exact and precise details of the difference between God and the living entities. This is something that the Mayavadis have only partial knowledge of. And because they have partial knowledge of it, they will fall down even if they attain the Brahmajyoti. And of course, they're misleading people with absolutely false statements that the living entity becomes God at a certain stage through yoga or whatever, renunciation or whatever. So they are not only misled themselves, but they're expert at misleading others. And that is actually a very pernicious thing, to mislead a person from the truth to ignorance. So when it says Shruti Vichakrame Vishwan, so the destination of the living entities is the all-pervading personality of Godhead. So this should be our motto in life. Om Tat Vishnu Paramam Padam Satapasyanti Surayo. The demigods are always aiming to attain the lotus feet of the Lord. And we should always be Shiti Vikchakrame Vishwan. That is, by its energies, the all-pervading personality of God is thus comprehensively the master in the activities of controlling and in devotional service. He's the ultimate master of both nescience and factual knowledge of all situations. Now someone can say, wait a minute, how can it be the master of nescience? That's a bad thing. No, it's not. Because people cannot engage in sense gratification unless they forget Krishna. So therefore, Krishna has to help the living entity who wants sense gratification by helping him forget him or forget Krishna so that they feel free to engage in sense gratification. Otherwise, you would be forcing them like a robot to be a devotee. And there's no robotics in the spiritual world. You only have that nonsense in the material world. A robot does not have any free will. It's completely controlled by whoever is programming it. So, therefore, Krishna does not make robots. He expands himself in an infinite number of jivas in order to increase his own transcendental, let's say, pastimes. Like, for example, why do a mother and father have children? And a child is an expansion of the mother and father. Why do they do it? Well, they're thinking that it will expand their happiness in life, right? And, when the baby is born, the father goes, oh, goo, goo, gaga, and smiling, and the child smiles back. Oh, look at that, he smiled, And then the first time the child tries to walk, oh, look at that, he's trying to walk, it's so cute, then he fell down. So this is all happiness. Of course, later on, it all becomes misery, but in the beginning, it's all happiness, right? They're expanding their happiness. And it's a miracle how a mother can produce a child in her womb. Right? Of course, she doesn't do it herself. It's all controlled by Krishna. But it's a miracle, isn't it? The child has these little fingers and little toes and a little ear and a little nose, and how did that happen? And then it's going to grow. All this is miraculous. It's unbelievable. But yet, we see it with our own eyes, but we take it for granted. But actually, it's a marvelous miracle how the mother produces a child in her womb. It's incredible. Well, of course, the truth is that the mother is just the ingredient provider, and the father is the seed provider. But the whole thing is controlled by Krishna. So therefore, Shriti Vichakrame Vishwan, that the destination of living entities exists comprehensively and is the all-pervading personality of Godhead. So that should be our goal in life, to always come closer and closer to Krishna. It just says sometimes people say, oh, please give me a blessing, a blessing, a blessing. Well, the highest blessing is Krishna Matir Astu. May you always remember Krishna, because that's why we're in the material world. We forgot Krishna. But if we can always remember Krishna, we go back to the spiritual world. Okay, so in the Bhagavad Gita 13.3, we have this verse, Chetragyam Chapimam Vidi Sarvachetreshu Bharata. So that's a very important verse. It's in the 13th chapter, 3rd verse. Let's see what it says. Sarvachetreshu Bharata. Chetra Gayor. Chetra Gayor Jnanam Yajtat Jnanam Matam Mama. So, this says, O Skyna Bharata, O Arjuna, you should understand that I am also the knower in all bodies, and to understand this body and its knower is called knowledge. That is my opinion. Well, how much do we know about our own body? Very little. But one thing we do know is that this body is prone to suffering. And birth, old age, disease, and death, all this is suffering. And that one thing we learn little by little. Of course, we want to avoid suffering. We try and do everything to avoid it, but still, it happens. Like, for example, a king is sitting on his throne in the early evening, and he's talking. All of a sudden, he hears a mosquito, right? You know, that sound, you know, and it's hovering around his ear, you know, and he goes like this, trying to get rid of it, you know, and then again it goes, it comes again, you know, and finally it bites him, and then he's like this, I got bit again by this mosquito, and it's scratching and everything. So that's a king. He has a big army, right? You got all these soldiers and big palaces made out of marble and stone and everything. Still the mosquito gets him. So who's stronger, the mosquito or the king? Who can't stop the mosquito from biting him, you see. And then there's the bedbug. Bedbug can bite the king also. He wakes up in the morning, says this big red spot on his hand or a big itch on his back. You know, he got bit by a bedbug. And the bedbug connects to his body like that and sucks his blood. Right? So who's stronger, the bedbug or the king, you see? Well, there's competition for food in this world. There's competition for lording it over. And that competition is what creates strife and suffering. Anyway, Prabhupada writes in a purport, while discussing the subject of the body and the knower of the body, the soul and the supersoul, we shall find 3 different topics of study: the Lord, the living entity, and matter. Now that's an amazing statement by Prabhupada. Because who actually knows about this body? Very few people understand the body. Although it's their body. But things are happening that they don't know how it's happening. You know, they're not consciously controlling their breathing at night, but yet it's going on automatically. They don't understand how they digest food, but yet it's going on automatically. They don't understand how blood is being produced in their body, but yet it's going on automatically. Right? They don't understand the relationship between the plasma and the blood system and the exchanges that take place, but yet it's going on. There's hardly anything they understand about the body. They don't even understand that there's a super soul in the body that's present and witnessing everything they do. In fact, there's an interesting statement in that matter. It says, 6th Canto, 1st chapter, 22nd verse, in a purport. Well, that verse says, if illicit sex is allowed to increase in society, however, the entire society will be condemned, for it will be full of rogues, thieves, cheaters, and so forth. Well, guess what? Illicit sex is allowed to increase in America, this country that we're living in. And it says the entire society will be condemned, for it will be full of rogues, thieves, cheaters, and so forth. So Prabhupada in the purport writes, this verse indicates how degraded one becomes simply by indulging in illicit sex with a prostitute. Illicit sex is not possible with a chaste or aristocratic woman, but only with unchaste Sudras. The more society allows prostitution and illicit sex, the more impetus it gives to cheaters, thieves, plunderers, drunkards, and gamblers. Therefore, we first advise all the disciples in our Krishna consciousness movement to avoid illicit sex, which is the beginning of all abominable life, and which is followed by meat eating, gambling, and intoxication. So one time, what's his name? Janavatsal Prabhu asked a question. It's probably one of those questions he always asks people who give lectures to stump them. You know what that word means, stump? You know, get them flustered and not able to answer it properly. So what was his question? He says, this was a long time ago he asked this question. He says, this morning, Maharaj, you read a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam which states that the foremost reason for the living entity to come to this material world is to experience sexual enjoyment. So the question is, why, amongst all Krishna's pastimes that the living entity want to imitate, why sex is the number one, which follows another question in this activity, not available in the spiritual world for the jiva soul. Janavatsala Prabhu. So he's asking two questions. He said, well, how come there's no illicit sex in the spiritual world if everything in the material world is in the spiritual world? And then he's saying that why amongst all Krishna's pastimes that the living entity wants to imitate, why sex is the number one? Which follows another question in this activity. Okay, so first of all, he's questioning, is sex really the foremost reason for the living entity to come to this material world? Right, that's question one. And then he's saying, why is this? And amongst all Krishna's pastimes, the living entity wants to imitate. Why is he trying to imitate sex? And why is it the number one thing that he's trying to imitate? And then and then the third question is, this activity of illicit sex is not available in the spiritual world for the jiva soul. Question mark. In other words, saying, is this a fact? Well, here's the answer. 6th canto, 1st chapter, 22nd verse. And it says, this verse indicates how degraded one becomes simply by indulging in illicit sex with a prostitute. Illicit sex is not possible with a chaste or aristocratic woman, but only with unchaste Sudras. The more society allows prostitution and illicit sex, the more impetus it gives to cheaters, thieves, plunderers, drunkards, and gamblers. That's exactly what's happening today. Therefore, we first advise all the disciples in our Krishna consciousness movement to avoid illicit sex, which is the beginning of all abominable life, and which is followed by meat eating, gambling, and intoxication. In other words, anyone who engages in illicit sex, they will also go down a slippery slope to meat eating, gambling, and intoxication. Then Prabhupada says, of course, restraint is very difficult, but it's quite possible if one fully surrenders to Krishna, since all these abominable habits gradually become distasteful for a Krishna-conscious person. If illicit sex is allowed to increase in a society, however, the entire society will be condemned, for it will be full of rogues, thieves, cheaters, and so forth. Prostitute hunting is so abominable that the desire for sex with a prostitute can ruin one's character, destroy one's exalted position, and plunder all one's money. Therefore, illicit sex is strictly prohibited. Well, now we understand why there's no illicit sex in the spiritual world. Because it would cause the corruption of everyone there, right? So it's not allowed. And if anyone even has a whiff or a little hint of the desire for illicit sex, immediately they fall down from the spiritual world. And they can try and satisfy themselves all they want, but it just leads to disaster, right? And this is a fact. Now, an example of this today is the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo. Is it Andrew, I think? Anyway, it's Cuomo. Cuomo now is, there's been a investigation of him. There's about 5 or 6 different investigations going on of him. But there's one investigation that came to an end with a full conclusion, 160 pages of proof that he engages in inappropriate behavior with his female workers, right? And that anyway, we won't go into what he did, but it's all the details are there. He was probably going to be forced to resign. And why? Well, because anyone who is thinking of, planning of, and doing illicit sexual activities ruins their life. And they become rogues, thieves, cheaters, and so forth. Well, here's a guy, governor of one of the most important states in the United States, one of the richest states, and he is a rogue, a thief, and a cheater, and a liar also, because he's saying he didn't do anything wrong, right? So he's not the first one. Previously, another governor of New York, that same thing happened to him. And it's happening all the time, all over the country, because anyone addicted to these bad habits, and one leads to the other, it all begins with illicit sex, and it goes into all the others. And it's the same thing. And if one desires illicit sex, they immediately fall down from the spiritual world, and then they come into the world of struggling and competing, and always downward spiral to becoming a thief, a rogue, a cheater, a liar, etc. Okay. In 6164, it says, there are many instances throughout the world in which even a purified person, being attracted by a prostitute, spends all the money he has inherited. Prostitute hunting is so abominable that the desire for sex with a prostitute can ruin one's character, destroy one's exalted position, and plunder all one's money. Therefore, illicit sex is strictly prohibited. One should be satisfied with his married wife, for even a slight deviation will create havoc. A Krishna-conscious grihastha should always remember this. He should always be satisfied with one wife and be peaceful simply by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. Otherwise, at any moment, he may fall down from his good position, as exemplified in the case of Ajamila. Well, therefore, who is the owner of this body? This is the question. And the actual owner of the body is the super soul, or Krishna. We don't own the body. We don't own any of the functions that the body is undertaking. Like, for example, this body produces blood. No scientist has ever been able to reproduce blood. They reproduce maybe some aspects of it, but they've never been able to reproduce blood. And the person that does reproduce blood will become the richest person in the world, much richer than Bezos and Gates and all of them put together. But we are making blood ourselves. That's why there's always this demand. Please give blood. Please give blood. We're running out of blood. We don't have enough blood. We need this type of blood, and there's different types of blood, and so forth. So this is a miraculous thing that this body is doing, and it's our own body, and we don't understand how it is. You see? This is the extent of our understanding. It's almost zero. But why? Because everyone's overwhelmed with this idea of dominating in the material world and exploiting, and ultimate exploitation is illicit sex. So therefore, Prabhupada says, one who studies the subject matter of the field of activity and the knower of the field very minutely in terms of this Bhagavad Gita can attain to knowledge. So this is what we should teach our kids. Know your body. Well, they'll say, well, yeah, I'm studying botany in our class. We're dissecting a frog. Well, what are you going to understand by dissecting the frog? You're not going to understand how the body works. You'll understand a few things, but not much. I mean, I dissected a frog, in college. And if I was going to be a doctor, I would have to dissect a human being also. They bring in the dead body and you dissect it, It's all nonsense, actually. But, it's part of the training of being a doctor, especially a surgeon. You have to learn all the names of the different bones and the capillaries and the tendons and the joints. And you have to memorize all that stuff, right? It takes years to memorize it all. And therefore they have specialization. They'll gloss over other parts of the body, but they're going to become an expert in one part of the body. Like there's a brain surgeon, right? Or there's foot and ankle doctor, or there's a sinus doctor, or there's an elbow doctor. Why? Because no one doctor can understand everything about the physical makeup of the body. It's too complicated. And they have names for everything. All these Greek and Latin names for everything. This bone, that bone, this tooth, that tooth, this thing, that thing. So you have to have this specialization. And then you have the general practitioner, but he's always referring people to the specialists. The eye and ear nose doctor, right? But do they actually understand the body? Answer is no. They don't really understand the body. They don't understand how all these things are happening in the body. It's all under the control of Krishna. So Krishna controls the knowledge, and he also controls nescience, or ignorance. He's the supreme controller, right? So, and because also he instructs people in two ways. He instructs people by speaking Bhagavad Gita, and he instructs people by the severe action of Durga Mata that makes people suffer. It gives them first success and then takes it away from them. And why does she take it away from them? Because they're engaging in sinful activities. Just like we see right now. This is severe drought. It hasn't rained for 2 months. Yesterday it tried to rain a little bit, but it was just a few drops. We see the clouds, but there's no rain coming down. Right? So this is serious because, in certain places, in California and other western states, there's no water. Very little water. And they're losing their crops. You see. And this happens because of sinful activity and because the whole society is degrading into rogues, thieves, cheaters, prostitute hunters, liars. The moral fiber of people is being destroyed now, right in front of our eyes. What are we going to do about it? See, the only thing we can do is to spread Krishna consciousness. So, this illicit sex is the reason why we have come to the material world. And unless we can control it, everything else will be, contaminated. And therefore, Prabhupada says in the 5th canto, 14th chapter, 9th verse, illicit sex is the most prominent sin due to lusty desire. When one associates with the mode of passion, he's implicated in suffering life after life. There's your answer, Janavatsal Prabhu, to all your questions, and that's why it doesn't exist in the spiritual world. And whatever is considered to be of the nature of sexual relationship or conjugal relationship has nothing to do with what we understand in the material world or what we experience in the material world. This is another major point. It has nothing to do in the spiritual world. Has no illicit sex as in the material world. But there is sexuality in the spiritual world. But it is completely different from what we understand here. And we've discussed this also. There are a whole bunch of verses where in the 1st canto and the 10th canto that explains the nature of Krishna's conjugal affairs. It has nothing to do with what's in this world or the way people engage in these illicit activities. There's no illicit activities in the spiritual world. Okay, so this body is called Kshetra, and within it dwells the owner of the body and the Supreme Lord, who knows both the body and the owner of the body. Therefore, he's called the knower of all fields. The distinction between the field of activities, the knower of activities, and the supreme knower of activities is described as follows. Perfect knowledge of the constitution of the body, the constitution of the individual soul, and the constitution of the supersoul is known in terms of Vedic literature as jnana. That is the opinion of Krishna. To understand both the soul and the supersoul as one, yet distinct, is knowledge. One who does not understand the field of activity and the knower of activity is not in perfect knowledge. One has to understand the position of Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer of nature, and Ishvara, the knower who dominates or controls nature and the individual soul. One should not confuse the three in their different capacities. One should not confuse the painter, the painting, and the easel. This material world, which is a field of activities, is nature, and the enjoyer of nature is a living entity, and above them both is the supreme controller, the personality of Godhead. It is stated in the Vedic language in the Svatasvatara Upanishad 1.12, Bhuktaram Bhogyam Peritaram Chamatva Sarvam Proktam Trividam Brahmam Etat. There are three Brahman conceptions. Prakriti is Brahman as the field of activities, and the Jiva, individual soul, is also Brahman and is trying to control material nature, and the controller of both of them is also Brahman, but he is the factual controller. So here we have all this information in Bhagavad Gita. This is what our kids should learn, not the junk that they learn, not dissecting a frog or dissecting a human being. Yeah, that might be useful if you want to get a job being a surgeon, but it's not useful as far as understanding the body. The body is completely controlled by Krishna. Krishna is present in the body, but when they dissect the frog and they dissect the human being, they don't find the supersoul. Right? So what good is it, their dissection? Right? You can find everything in the Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. That's what children should learn. Okay, and then there's this point where Prabhupada makes, and that is that the Supersoul, or the Paramatma, the Supreme Controller, being present everywhere, knows everyone's thinking, feeling, and willing activities. And as such, the individual living entity is the minute master of his personal affairs, whereas the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the master of everyone's affairs, past, present, and future. Vedaham samatitani vartamanani charjana bhavishyami sabhutani mam taveda nakaschana. That's a very important verse in the 7th chapter, and it is number 26, where it says, O Arjuna, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, I know everything that has happened in the past, all that is happening in the present, and all things that are yet to come. I also know all living entities, but me, no one knows. So, but yet, when Krishna talks about himself, and when the acharyas, pure devotees, talk about Krishna, then we can know, if we listen carefully and on a regular basis. So this whole purport is explaining in very fine detail the difference between Krishna and the living entity. So we're going to go over it tomorrow, and because this whole chapter and most of the second canto is about explaining the difference, the similarities and the difference between the Jiva and Krishna. And if we understand this, then Janma karma chame divyam evam yo veti tatvata tyakva deham punarjanma naiti mameti sarjana. 4th chapter, 9th verse. Anyone who understands the transcendental nature of Krishna's appearance and activities does not take birth again, but comes back to me, Krishna says. So after they die, they don't take birth again. They go back to Godhead. That's how powerful this knowledge is. So we're going to go over this again tomorrow in much more detail and exact points of difference. This is real knowledge. So thank you very much. Are there any questions? You can ask your kid, you dissected the frog, what did you see? They'll say, well, there's a lot of stool. You dissect the human being, what do you see? You know, a lot of stool, you know, a lot of things, but they don't see Krishna. So what was the use of doing it? You know? It's only to get a job, just like, you know, an astrologer. You know, what's is it spiritual astrology? It has some relationship, yes, but usually it's just another way of earning a living. Right? And do they become Krishna conscious by following astrology and becoming an expert in astrology? Not really. Are they correct in most of their calculations? Maybe, but it's not a foolproof science the way they practice it. Can they help people become Krishna conscious through astrology? No. You say it's just a way to make a living. That's all. Yeah.
Maharaj, is there anything called spiritual astrology, or people do, some devotees do?
Well, I mean, Nanda Maharaj asked an astrologer about his son. So yeah, anything in the material world that we see can exist in the spiritual world, but in a purified form. So astrology is explained in the Vedas also. It's in the Atharva Veda, there's the knowledge of astrology. So anything can be dovetailed to Krishna, then it becomes spiritual. You know. But most of the astrologers, you know, they're telling you, in the future you're going to go on a long trip, and you're going to meet someone, and it's going to be very profitable. They talk all this, you know, you're coming into a period where it's going to be a little difficult. Your Rahu is more prominent, blah, blah, blah. Does that mean your Rahu's not going to zap you? No. You're still going to get zapped by Rahu. Right? We're being zapped all the time by Rahu. What are you talking about?
I grew up with this astrology. Like, for everything, my family was consulting, and I was into it. But from last many years...
Well, did it help?
I don't know.
If they say, you know, don't go out Thursday at 1 o'clock. Between 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock is a very dangerous time, right? Did you know, but if you have a job and you're forced to go out, but even if you don't go out, does that mean that, you know, you're going to be spared suffering? No, we're suffering all the time.
And there were always some recommendations to do this, that, and wear these kind of rings and so many things. I gave up all. But there were so many.
It may have some validity to it, but ultimately, you know, it's better just to take complete shelter of the holy name and Krishna. Right? There are many situations in life you can't do anything to change the situation. Yeah, so the only solution is to depend on Krishna. That's what should be taught. That's the best astrology. What is it? Astrology. It's two Greek words. It means the study of the stars, or the study of, you know, your destiny. Well, the best way to study your destiny is to chant Hare Krishna and become a devotee and be under the protection of Krishna. Krishna personally protects his devotees. And for the others who don't surrender to Krishna, they're under the control of the demigods. So the real mercy or kripa is with Krishna. The demigod's kripa is very limited, very, very limited. Haribol.